we decided we would try and develop a food forest here in Sheridan.
In Sheridan and Casper, there are a couple of projects that offer a departure from our hyper-productive food system.
So the idea was to get food naturally in a setting that would make it itself. So you didn't have to really do a whole lot with it. You just needed to forage. By August of 2016, we had this all planted.
Food forests on this Farm to Fork, Wyoming.
Funding for Farm to Fork, Wyoming is provided by Wyoming Community Bank, your locally owned community bank in Riverton and Lander, and on the web at www.wyocb.com, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
In Casper, Tara Farm and Nursery has been harvesting from this permaculture garden for a number of years now.
But the idea of permaculture, and one of the funny ironies of it, is permanent agriculture or permanent horticulture, permaculture. And yet one of the basic understandings of permaculture practice is change is the only constant.
What these two projects have in common is the idea of creating a food source that you don't need to replant each year. Instead, they establish a diverse, ever-evolving community of trees, shrubs, and perennials that mature and change over time.
Many people have annual gardens, but the value of berries and trees and perennials is something that I hadn't thought about before, and I thought that would be a great thing.
It's been like nothing else I've worked on yet. Most of my experiences is helping people with vegetable gardens, which are typically annual type plants. You know, here we have perennial food plants and trees, and then we've got this wild component for pollinators. So what I'm trying to promote here, or hoping to educate people on, is the diversity that you can get off of one piece of ground.
This is an idea that is quite familiar to those who practice permaculture.
So it really is landscape design. It's just a design that is based upon the observations of what nature has already figured out. So instead of being artistic and throwing all that conventionalism to the wind that's been figured out for the last millions of years, we base our design on nature.
This doesn't have to be just fruit trees. That's typically the way that we were taught agriculture. Is your plant is good, all other plants are bad. Here, this thing kind of embraces all the other plants because everything has a use to something.
So diversity is a huge part of design work in permaculture. And for good reason, in that, of course, obviously nature figured out that's the way to survive because you have a diverse group of things in an ecosystem.
And what we're demonstrating here is that you can have two different things happening on the same piece of ground. So you've got a fruit tree here, but why not have a plant that benefits pollinators right under the fruit tree? They can coexist. We call it companion planting.
And this diversity comes with the benefit of resilience.
So when you build what you call a food forest, you'll have a couple of different kinds of fruit. Now what happened this year, the flowers that were on here, right in the period of time that they would have had the potential to produce fruit, we had one of those heavy monsoonal downpours here. And all of the flowers turned brown the next day. So no elderberries, but the choke cherries just were crazy. I have pounds of them in my freezer. So the diversity in the tiers, if you don't have one of these, you have one of these. That's resiliency.
While Tara Farm is a private nursery, the Sheridan Food Forest is a public space and has a social layer to include in its planning.
We also decided that this place would be open to the public, There would be no ruling things in or out, but there would be the policy that if you wanted to plant here, because many people do ask if they can do that, and yes, they can plant here. As you can see over here, somebody decided to come in and plant squash. So that was something that one of the people who lives around here decided that they wanted squash, so they got to plant it. But they must realize that if they do, then that food is shared with the community. And you'll see some tomatoes over against the fence. We planted garlic and things like that. So people can do come in and plant things, but if it's gone, when it's ready to be picked and they don't get a share, they realize that that's what it is. The fun for them is in actually planting the things and watching them grow.
Ultimately, there is a clear structural strategy when building these plant communities.
The diversity should be not just in the types of plants you have, but also over time and over space. So over space, there are certain plants that actually need to be the lowest tier in a group. There are some that need to be in that middle ground. There are some, the job of which is purely canopy. And the way those things have evolved together in that group, in that sub-ecosystem, that is how they survive. So when we look at doing an installation, we want to observe in nature how the original ancestors of whatever we're putting in survived. And I can show you an example if we come over here. By the way, there's a bull snake named Phoebe who lives in here, and I'll let you know if I see her. So this little thing right here is a Cheyenne mock orange. Doesn't look like much right now, but it grows into the most beautiful understory shrub. And the white flowers, honest to goodness, smell like orange blossoms have never smelled. It does not produce fruit, but the yields that we talk about, obtaining a yield in permaculture, those yields include beauty and flowers and fragrance. And so in June, when those white flowers open up and the breeze is just right, you're happy to be out working hard on the things you have to work hard on. It's not just about the food, because even in those naturally derived groups, there are some that don't have food. But when the leaves fall off this, it becomes organic material in the understory and feeds the soil to allow more nutrients to build. So there's always some kind of key role.
And while Sheridan waits for its shrubs and trees to mature and bear fruit, it invites and nurtures another key element. It's pollinators.
Because that was the other specific that we wanted to do. We knew that bees may indeed be in trouble, and we wanted to see how many bees were in the area so that we would have pollinators. We would have a count every year and try and increase the food and see if we could draw in pollinators and see how many there were.
We've done these censuses every month since we started in the summer months back in 2016 in August. We counted 15 native bees and about 10 wasps and hornets and maybe one pollinating fly. And then moving on to this year, the last count we did was a couple weeks ago on August 18th. And we're up to 138 native bees. So the food forest plantings have done a tremendous job of increasing the native pollinators.
We are seeing all kinds of pollinators here. I've seen everything from honeybees to mason bees. There's a wasp there, but it's on flowers. And this is the first week of September. It's a really critical time for some of these solitary bees, because right now is when the queens are developing that will produce next generation, next year. So it's a really critical time. And of course your fruit trees don't have any flowers on them. in September.
Now, once all these flowers get open on this blue spirea, it will be covered. I will have 8 or 10 different types of bees. I don't think people realize how many native bees there are. The carpenters and the mason bees. This is a little bumblebee.
So we've been looking at plants here that bloom at different parts of the year. So there's always something available for these pollinators.
But there are also other pollinators people don't realize. There are flies, some flies that actually look like bees that serve a good pollinator function. There are butterflies, moths, and that moth is pollinating. He's not just flitting around.
The other creature that is attracted by this are the tiny wasps that are beneficial insects. And they have their bodies just glow and shimmer like mother of pearl. They're very, very tiny. They won't sting you if you don't sting them. They'll just crawl around until you scare them. But they do two things. They're pollinators because they go from flower to flower, but they also lay their eggs in insects that are pests. Soft-bodied nymphs, the babies, they'll lay their eggs in those. So they also are beneficial insects, not just pollinators if you're talking categories. So they also reduce the predatory insects that are going to damage your fruit.
Hornets also pollinate things.
These yellow jackets, I've always gotten along well with them. Actually, I view them as a beneficial insect because they eat so many aphids and caterpillars. They are carnivores, and that's what they're doing here, crawling around as they're looking for things. They're looking for meat. And
They're looking for meat.
so they're kind of a natural control.
And solitary native bees ensure the pollination of numerous wild fruit crops.
The native bees nest in holes and crevices, often in the ground, but you can attract them by making a bee house here. Harold Golden has made this by drilling holes in a short log here. He's put the screen on there to keep birds out of it, I guess. Woodpeckers. And some of the holes have bee eggs and larvae behind them, and then they stuff it with mortar.
But those holes are drilled this deep. So the bee, the queen, will go to the back of the hole and lay an egg, and then she'll bring in honey and pollen that's kind of all balled up and put that in there for that egg to feed on. And then she builds a wall inside that tunnel. And then she'll come in and start over. A new egg, another ball of pollen and honey that she's gathered from around here, and seal that off. So each of these holes here may have as many as a dozen bees in there. So this was probably the work of one queen, but after these are filled, she dies. That's it for this summer. These eggs then will overwinter and develop next spring, feeding on the honey and pollen, and they'll emerge next spring, mate, start again. So it's an annual thing. One of the things you look at when you're trying to locate one of these houses, or where to put it, is a mud source. They can only fly like 100 feet. So we have to have our pollen source, pollen and nectar, within 100 feet, and we need a mud source here too. And if you think about it from the population standpoint, it's a really fragile survival strategy. If we had a late frost or something, or a disease that came through, some climate change, whatever, that wiped out that year's generation, there's nothing to carry through to the next year. So I'm amazed that they've made it this long, but they're just fascinating little creatures.
And these gardens include a number of berry plants that have co-evolved with these native pollinators.
This this little area, these are all gooseberry plants.
And they're very early. They produce in probably June, I think, is when I harvested off those. So spatially, the lower level, temporally, they're going to be one of your earliest fruits if they take.
They're native to Wyoming, and they have little green berries. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
On this side, these are currants. In the wild, we have the golden currant, the alpine currant, we have native currants. These are horticultural derivatives of the natives, but they are crazy happy here. I have red and a pink, and the black currants are my absolute favorite. And again, I have pounds of these. They are so ripe right now, and they are on the wild side, which means they have seeds and they don't get sweet like strawberries or raspberries, but they produce the most wonderful juice.
In this area, these are strawberries. We had a good hill of strawberries this year, and a lot of people had them. People were making strawberry drinks.
So, the riparian grape. This is one of the great ancestors, native grapes in North America. There's two of them, Riparia and Brusca, were the two native grapes that were found in North America. This is a native riparian. This is not a horticultural, and it's doing very well. These vines then can fill in those middle ranges that sometimes are left open when you're putting an installation in for a food forest. Now, they don't produce as quickly as people like, but it's very healthy. And for people in Wyoming, they should know this. There is a nematode in Wyoming that carries a virus that causes something that's called mosaic virus, and it makes the leaves look like little mosaics or glass windows. It won't kill the plant. It doesn't stop the food.
Our long-term goal then would be to train this single cane to come up here and divide and move out this way. And then we'll have grapes up here where you can stand up and pick. You don't have to bend over to pick.
Let's look at some more grapes, because there's really a variety that work in Wyoming. And every time I go to farmer's market with the plants, people say, grapes don't grow in Wyoming. And I'm like, okay, well, somebody needs to tell my grapes that. These are valiant grapes. They're 2 steps away from the riparian we just saw. So the riparian is the great-grandparent. Concord grape is the next step. Everyone's familiar with Concord grapes. Super hardy, really heavy producers. That was the one that was developed out of that riparian. Valiant grape is the next step. It has a larger, sweeter fruit, but it's extremely hardy here, does very well. And these, I just noticed, these are 2-year-old vines. And look what we have right here. I'll try and bring them out in the sun so you can see. I was really worried that the weird weather was going to cause a problem with ripening, but look at that. So if we go to European native grapes, this is one that was developed out of that. This is a Frontenac. This is a real French wine grape. This is also a 2-year-old vine. A perennial vegetable that would be in your very low tier, rhubarb, grows like crazy here. I've already harvested these, but even though we hear about the poison that is in the nicotinic acid, I think it is, that's in the rhubarb leaves, grasshoppers don't seem to notice. So when people talk about using neonicotinoids, you might as well count out the grasshoppers of Wyoming, because nothing stops them. Okay, so then here's the mother plant for the grapes. And again, oh look, I'm so happy. There was one year I actually got 5 gallons of juice just off this one plant. It is not that big, but if you look underneath here, there's grapes, little clumps of grapes everywhere, everywhere.
these are all raspberries.
These are ever-bearing. The reason they look like this is that the deer got in here and she nipped everything off early in the season, but look, there's brand new growth at the ends of every one of these. This is going to be something in your food forest or your installation that would be full sun, out of the wind. This is directly into clay soil. So this is not amended soil other than the mulch you see on top. I wanted to see what they would do directly into clay soil because so many of my clients, that's all they have. And if you've ever tried to improve clay soil, you'll be spending more time doing that than harvesting your fruit. But look at this. I mean, they do great. This is actually one plant. This is a mother plant all along this. And with the everbearing, what I like about choosing that one, last year's canes would produce this year's first crop. And as you're watching the babies grow, the new canes growing up, that's gonna be your second crop. So because the deer got me here, I lost the first crop, but I have a second crop.
This is the asparagus patch. And you can see the ferns here. So this was the third year that we planted this, and so next year people will be able to actually come in and take the spear.
And another perennial vegetable, which a lot of people will recognize, but some people are very surprised at, is asparagus. It's in straight clay, and I harvest 50%, and then I let 50% of it go to like this.
Walk in here a little farther. These bushes will get 6 to 8 feet tall and have cherries the size of what you could get in the store.
Let's take a look at the buffalo berry if we could do that. This is buffalo berry. It's a native to the Northern Rockies. We actually have it native here in the area. Of course, all these things prefer to grow in a riparian or river creek zone, but they do well just about anywhere. A couple of things about buffalo berry. One, yes, it does produce fruit. Two, you are taking your life in your hands when you harvest it. Three, it is a nitrogen fixer. Even after these leaves fall, they have more nitrogen in them than the air and the soil around them, so as they decay, not only do you get it from the roots, but you also get it from the fall leaves. They have very long, sticky, horrible, painful, nasty thorns, which they hide really well. Here we go. It has a little, you'll see like a little barb there. Mm-hmm. Once it sticks in you, it breaks off. Oh. Now, you see how big that is? These are deer resistant because of that. So I usually install these in a hedgerow or a windbreak on the wild side. When we talk about permaculture zones, zone 1 is the most activity closest to civilization, all the way out to 5, which is the wildlife corridor. You just manage that for wildlife. So this would be something that you would put on the wildlife side of an installation. It grows very thick. It loses all its leaves in the winter, but because of the density of the branches, it still provides some buffer. But with the leaves off, it also lets the sun in, so you can get some solar warmth. Whereas right now, it's shading the hottest side of my cabin here. So I could easily list 20 to 25 things that this particular plant does. There's so much positive potential in this particular plant, and it's native here. So that's the coolest thing, is you don't have to work very hard, but you do have to know where you're putting it. And as far as harvesting those berries, here's the trick. When they're really dark, really golden red, you get one night that's 40 degrees or so. We have those every once in a while, and they're ready to go. You put a sheet underneath it, and you beat it with a broomstick.
We get excited about this place because of the potential of what you can do with it.
Being able to do this for the majority of people is a luxury. It shouldn't be. It should be so practical.
Everybody remembers picking apples as a kid. Maybe now you're 70 years old and you live in an apartment. You don't have that opportunity anymore.
I had a woman in one of my classes who was way up into her 80s, and every time I would talk about something, she was sitting there nodding her head. And she's nodding her head and her eyes are shining like this. And she goes, everything you're saying my grandmother taught me, and where is it now?
So there's a group that might come here just want to pick some apples to make a jar jelly, and that's fun for them. There will be other people that want to come here, and we've seen some already. They just come here just on their daily walk, and they just swing through here, just kind of a little nature walk thing. So it's a little timeout spot.
It also has impacts that we may never ever be aware of, but it increases the quality of somebody's life.
This episode of Farm to Fork Wyoming is available for $25. Order online at shop.wyomingpbs.org. This program was produced by Wyoming PBS, which is solely responsible for its content. To learn more and watch Wyoming PBS programs online, visit us at wyomingpbs.org.